We were a bunch of women who came from all over the world to Seoul in 1988 to teach English. Korea was transforming and opening up its doors to the West. The 1988 Olympics really represented South Korea's debut on the world stage. We were helping teach English to Koreans so that they were prepared for the new world coming into their peninsula. It was an interesting time. It was a dangerous time. There was Sandra. She took me under her wing, and we definitely bonded. Kathy Patrick, she was the head teacher, kind of our boss. I was definitely a party girl. And then there was Carolyn Abel. She was sparkly. She was beautiful, really funny. She had a wicked sense of humor.
My sister Carolyn was an adventurer. People did notice her. She was vibrant. She attracted people's attention.
She had become friends with all of us, but particularly with Kathy. They were like sisters. Life that year was great. We had so much fun. We worked hard, we played hard, we partied at night. Everything was going so well. All our fun came to a sudden crashing halt when one of us, Carolyn Abel, was murdered.
It was absolutely horrible, brutal, violent. There were multiple stab wounds. I can't even begin to describe what that loss has been, like somebody had detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of the family.
So whoever killed Carolyn is still out there.
We're at Newark Airport, about to head overseas to try to find some answers. What happened to this woman? Carolyn Abel. And where did Carolyn live?
Carolyn lived over there.
Out in this direction here?
Out in this direction. I've been asking questions for 30 years. What happened the night that Carolyn was killed?
Everybody loved Carolyn.
Who was in the room? Who put the knife in?
Why should anybody be able to get away with murdering somebody and never face charges?
More than 30 years later, our investigation has brought us here to a university in Bellingham, Washington, where Carolyn Abel's alleged killer works. We just got word. We're gonna make our move now. Okay, this is the building.
We were so sure the enemy was on the outside, it never occurred to any of us that the killer was among us.
"48 hours, out of reach," reported by Peter Van Sant.
For writer and author Nancy Burkaw, flying to South Korea in the winter of 2018 reopened a painful chapter in her life, one of murder, loss, and fear.
Not only were we devastated about the loss of Carolyn, we of course wondered who's next.
Back in Seoul, where should be our first stop?
Well, I think we should go to the school, to ELS, where we all taught.
ELS is the English language school,
This is the neighborhood.
where Nancy met fellow teacher Carolyn Abel back in 1988.
This is the school, and the world was never the same for any of us who were in that building together on December 20th.
The events of that day have haunted Carolyn Abel's family for more than 30 years.
And the damage that's been done was just so devastating.
Wanda Abel remembers her younger sister Carolyn as the center of attention from an early age.
This is our very first passport photo. Carolyn is on the right.
This is a passport picture with 3 people in it.
Yeah. She was the youngest and the cutest and the baby of the family.
The youngest daughter of professors Dr. Francis and Evelyn Abel, Carolyn had a love of photography and a wanderlust that took her around the world.
My mother said in retrospect, it was almost like she knew she didn't have a lot of time. She wanted to do as much as she could in the time she had and not waste a second.
By the time she graduated from college, Carolyn had already lived in Pakistan, East Asia, Germany, and France.
She would get restless. She didn't like being just in one place for too long.
That restlessness compelled Carolyn to join the Peace Corps after college, serving in Nepal, where she taught English. In 1987, Carolyn took another teaching job in Japan, where she met this man, Tomoyuki Ayagaki, a customs agent.
She's always cheerful.
Did she make you laugh?
Yes, she's funny.
Carolyn and Tomoyuki began a relationship that very quickly became serious.
Did you fall in love with Carolyn?
Oh, yes.
Tomoyuki did propose to Carolyn.
And what was her answer, do you know?
Carolyn was trying to decide whether she would be happy being married and staying in Japan.
While contemplating a future life with Tomoyuki, Carolyn received an offer for another job, 330 miles away and across the Sea of Japan.
And in the fall of 1988, Carolyn set out on her next great adventure in life, teaching English here in Seoul, South Korea.
And from the minute she walked into the staff room, she was just a breath of fresh air. She sort of looked a little bit like Farrah Fawcett.
That's where Carolyn quickly fell in with Nancy Burkhaw and the other American teachers at school, like Sandra Ames, who requested that we alter her current appearance for this interview.
She was making her students laugh and sing and have fun learning English.
And Tamara Doak.
She made friends with everybody. She was very, very friendly.
So this is Kathy.
Carolyn also hit it off with the head teacher at the school, Kathy Patrick.
Carolyn and Kathy Patrick were extremely good friends. They were considered, if I can use a modern term, besties.
The women taught, traveled, and partied together.
Expat life in Seoul in the late 80s was wild. And one place where our worlds collided, and that was Itaewon, the red light district. This is where Kathy and Sandra and Carolyn and Tamara and I would come. So what we did is we danced and drank like crazy people.
On the weekend of December 17th, 1988, just 3 days before the murder, Sandra, Kathy, Carolyn, and some Korean students took a trip into the mountains. Carolyn took these pictures.
We spent the time looking at temples and hiking, and then partying in the evenings.
Classes were winding down for the winter break. Tomoyuki was getting ready to fly to Seoul, hoping to get an answer to his marriage proposal. On Tuesday, December 20th, Carolyn never made it to work.
And a lot of us missed work on occasion for various reasons.
I was not at that point concerned, but Kathy was concerned about Carolyn because she couldn't get her on the phone.
Kathy was asking all of us, had any of us heard from Carolyn? No.
Kathy was very upset, convinced that something had happened to Carolyn.
And I said, well, maybe we should go over there.
At that point, some of our students drove us to Carolyn's apartment We went into the apartment, and Kathy discovered the body. She was murdered brutally and horribly and in a way that she did not deserve.
And we were just all in shock, just trying to figure out what happened.
I think we all just felt like, what the hell's gonna happen now? Are we in danger? How will Sandra and Kathy ever recover from the shock of seeing their dead friend? Where do we go from here?
Carolyn's apartment was on the 15th floor. So here we are. I'm Peter Van Sant, and I'm a reporter for CBS News, and we are working on a story about a woman named Carolyn who used to live in your apartment. And we came by to ask you if we may have permission to come into your apartment to take some video pictures.
Early in the afternoon on December 20th, 1988, colleagues and students of Carolyn Abels came to this apartment building after she failed to show up for work.
Kathy, Sandra, and 3 Korean men walked down this hallway. Surprisingly, the door was unlocked, and they went inside.
Who was the first person into the apartment?
Kathy. She did a beeline right to the bedroom. Kathy came out of the room and said, "Carolyn's dead. We need to call an ambulance. No, we need to call the cops." And she didn't want me to go look at the body.
So we have our shoes off.
And we're ready to check out the murder scene. This is the room where Carolyn Abel left this world, and she put up a fight in her last minutes of life. She had a number of defensive wounds, and she took the brunt of it. More than 30 stab wounds, including a cut up from ear to ear on the throat, and there was blood everywhere in here, on the walls, on the bed. It was a mess.
Korean police and press swarmed the apartment, which had been ransacked. And within hours,
미국인 여자 학원 강사가 자신의 아파트에서
the murder led the national news in South Korea.
현대 경찰이 수사에
And
나섰습니다.
I remember watching the news and the cameras panning around the room, and they kept going in on this teddy bear. And it was really horrible.
The impact of seeing her body wheeled out in a body bag really made it quite real. It wasn't a dream. It became the nightmare that it really still is to this day.
How did you get the news of what had happened to your sister?
I was at home and my mother called me. She told me that Carolyn had been murdered, and I screamed. We were just crying, trying to figure out, I mean, how could this happen? Who would want to do this to her? Everybody loved Carolyn. Why?
With the killer still out there, Carolyn's friends wondered, could they be next?
We were all certain that perhaps a Korean had probably killed her. If a Korean hated an American this much, was he coming after the rest of us?
The shocked friends turned their attention to Kathy and Sandra, who had discovered Carolyn's body.
They seemed horrified. I was so concerned about them.
They were hysterical. It seemed as if they were having a nervous breakdown.
Days later, Kathy Patrick led a memorial service for Carolyn.
I think it was quite moving.
Even now thinking about it, you tear up a bit.
Kathy also wrote Carolyn's parents, Wanda, still has that letter.
Please know that I love Carolyn as a sister and a dear friend. My roommate and I are the two people who found Carolyn in her apartment. Let me know if I can tell you anything.
In Japan, Tomoyuki learned the love of his life was gone. But he decided to make his trip to South Korea anyway. He stayed with Kathy and Sandra.
Even today, after all these years, 30 years, this still gets to you, doesn't it?
Yeah. Sorry.
In Seoul, rumors were swirling, and South Korean police cast a wide net.
We were all suspects. Every single teacher on the staff was interviewed. You know, the Korean police were in our faces, just like, where were you? How did you know Carolyn? What's your story? Why are you here? Why did you come to our country? Are you secretly FBI? We just kept thinking, why are you asking me this? Get out there and find the real killer.
Then Nancy took a phone call in the teacher's lounge that moved the investigation in a whole new direction.
Sounded like a Korean woman. And then very quickly she said, I know who killed Carolyn. I said, what? She said, an American military officer.
Nancy told the South Korean police, who brought in detectives from the U.S. Army.
And very quickly thereafter, John Boatwright walked in.
John Boatwright was a legendary chief of detectives for the Army's Criminal Investigation Division in South Korea. He quickly eliminated the U.S. military officer who was pegged as a suspect by his ex-girlfriend.
He did not know Carolyn Abel, and it appeared that she was just trying to get revenge on him for the bad breakup.
3 weeks after the murder, an autopsy revealed the cause of death, a stab wound to her right lung. The report also confirmed her throat was cut.
In my opinion, her throat was cut after she was deceased.
After? How unusual is that, based on your experience?
Very unusual.
So what did happen at Carolyn's apartment?
And I was convinced that whoever did this probably knew Carolyn.
Why?
Because there was no signs of forced entry into the apartment. It appeared that whoever was in that apartment knew her.
There were 2 coffee cups found in the room. If there's a break-in, generally a criminal would not say, hey, let's have a cup of coffee before I ransack your place and attack you.
That certainly would not be normal.
Like his South Korean counterparts, Boatwright decided to question Carolyn's colleagues, who told him,
you really should look at the 2 girls who found the body.
Those 2 women, Sandra Ames and Kathy Patrick.
We assumed that a Korean had probably killed her, but little did we know that the enemy was inside that staff room with us.
Just weeks after Carolyn Abel's murder, the investigation by John Boatwright was focusing on the 2 friends who had discovered her body, roommates Kathy Patrick and Sandra Ames.
And do you get a chance to question each of them?
No. Kathy Patrick had already gotten on a plane and left Korea.
We had encouraged her to go. She must have lost 15 pounds. She just looked like someone who was about to break.
Kathy returned home to Washington State, but Sandra was still in Seoul.
I took a statement from her, and then I asked her, did you kill Carolyn? And she just sort of sat there and stared at me.
She's just staring at you.
That's correct. After about 30 seconds, she was very quiet, but she said, no, that was just not normal.
Sandra maintains she had nothing to hide, so 2 months after the murder, she waived her right to an attorney and agreed to take a lie detector test.
I remember being hooked up to all the wires in a darkened room.
He asked her, "Do you know where the murder weapon is?" And she said no. And she really peeked out on that, indicating that she was not being truthful.
I said, "I'm not lying, I'm telling the truth." So we took it again with the same results. And at that point, I said, "Let me tell you about this picture in my head." The picture was a dark shape on a bed covered in a quilt that I knew was a body.
Sandra described that picture in her head as a fragmented memory of that night. As Boatwright asked her for more details, she told a new story. It was nothing short of a bombshell.
The story began with being in bed and having Kathy at the door of my room and coming in and saying, "I think I killed Carolyn." "What with?" I asked. And she said, "A knife." "Where is it?" I asked. "In the kitchen sink."
Sandra said she was in disbelief and asked Kathy to take her to Carolyn's apartment, where she saw her friend's brutalized body on the bed, covered in blood.
To the best of my recollection, we sat in the living room at Carolyn's apartment, and she convinced me, manipulated me, to help her make it look like a robbery.
Though she didn't mention it when we spoke with her, Boatwright says that during their interview, Sandra made another statement about her own actions that night after she walked in and saw Carolyn's body.
She says, "I touched her arm and it was warm." And at that point, I realized that she may be still alive and that she might testify against Kathy. And so I went to the kitchen, got a knife, and came back, and I cut her throat to make sure she was dead.
Remember, Boatwright believed that wound was inflicted after Carolyn was already dead, from the stab wound to the lung.
So what Sandra is telling you is actually forensically matching up what was done to Carolyn's body.
Absolutely.
But Sandra's story quickly changed. In these official statements, Sandra wrote that Kathy had admitted to cutting Carolyn's throat. And today, Sandra claims that the only reason she made that admission was due to false memories implanted by investigators. But she doesn't deny going to the crime scene or handling the murder weapon.
You did tell authorities at the time that you cleaned a bloody knife.
I did, and that was because I remembered putting the clean knife into the dish rack. Kathy had said that that was the knife she had used to kill Carolyn.
It may seem far-fetched, but Sandra claims those memories had been suppressed deep in her subconscious mind until the interview with Boatwright.
So are you telling me the truth?
Yes. Yes.
Because some of these lapses in memory are kind of convenient.
Oh, they're very convenient, but no, this is the truth as I lived it.
Though Sandra's story was bizarre, to say the least, investigators believed the core details, which never changed, that Kathy woke her up and confessed to killing Carolyn, and the two of them staged it to look like a robbery. And the evidence they collected appeared to back that up.
Each time that she was interviewed later, she kept changing the facts to limit her involvement in the murder. But she never denied that Kathy did the murder, and she never denied that she was present just after the murder.
Who do you believe held the knife and murdered Carolyn Abel?
Kathy Patrick.
After her confession, Sandra Ames was kept in house arrest here in Seoul. 5 months later, in July of 1989, she pleaded guilty to harboring a criminal and suppressing evidence.
I was fingerprinted, photographed, and put into a holding cell.
But why would Kathy want Carolyn dead? Investigators uncovered a secret which provided a potential motive.
Kathy really fell for Carolyn.
Tamara Doak was one of the few teachers who knew Kathy was gay.
And she would confide in me, you know, I really like this woman. I think she's into me. And I'm like, Kathy, I don't really think she's gay. You should really be careful.
Kathy told me that she was in love with Carolyn and that her feelings were not necessarily returned.
I believe that Kathy and Carolyn were alone during that initial attack. The thing that makes most sense to me is Kathy tried to kiss Carolyn, and Carolyn pushed her away and rejected that kiss. I think Kathy was so enraged and angry that she lost control.
Kathy Patrick was now the prime suspect in Carolyn Abel's murder. A murder warrant for her arrest was issued in South Korea. Back in Japan, Carolyn's boyfriend, Tomoyuki, heard the news.
You stayed with Kathy at her apartment.
Yes. ものすごい、ショックで、そこに2晩も泊まらせてもらった自分ってちょっと情けなくてですね。
For her part in the alleged crimes, Sandra was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Meanwhile, Kathy Patrick was back at home in Washington state. The South Korean government made diplomatic requests to return her to Seoul from the U.S. to face a murder charge, but hit a wall.
There was no extradition treaty with Korea at the time.
Once she left, they couldn't get her back there.
Why couldn't we see through Kathy and Sandra? It's unreal. You know, so in one fell swoop, you learn that your friends are involved in this crime and that the one who might have been the killer is free because of this loophole in American law.
In the States, Carolyn's family pushed for an arrest.
The U.S. attorney in Washington state said, no, you can't arrest her because she hasn't committed a crime in the United States. There was no jurisdiction to arrest her for murder, and that's what pushed my family to say, wait a minute, this isn't right.
But American authorities weren't finished with Kathy Patrick, and soon they would come face to face with her.
Did you ask Kathy Patrick flat out, did you murder Carolyn Abel?
Yes, I did.
So this is one of the last pictures taken of her alive.
Right, right.
In the days after Carolyn's murder, Wanda worked overtime during the holidays to bring her home.
We got her back in time to hold the funeral on New Year's Eve.
Gone, but never forgotten. Wanda Abel and her family were pushing the government to pursue a case against Kathy Patrick, who had left South Korea just weeks after Carolyn's murder.
So do you believe this sudden move from South Korea to the United States was in a way an expression of consciousness of guilt?
Yes. Well, Kathy knew she did it, so she had to suspect that sooner or later somebody was going to put it together or that Sandra was going to crack and tell on her. So she spent as little time in South Korea as possible after she killed Carolyn.
With Kathy Patrick back in Washington state, Carolyn Abel's family was fearful they could be targeted.
I was worried that Kathy would try to kill us because Kathy wrote these letters to my parents that she was her great friend and that, you know, she'd love to meet them. And I was working through my mind, what would I do if I saw this person or if she showed up at my house.
Despite the lack of an extradition treaty, there was still that South Korean arrest warrant for murder for Kathy Patrick.
My name is Stephen Schroeder. I'm a retired assistant United States attorney, and I worked in Seattle.
They also asked the U.S. government for help.
What did the South Koreans want you to do?
Among other things, they wanted me to take a deposition of Kathy Patrick and ask her some questions about the murder that occurred in Seoul.
It was 1989 when Schroeder was assigned the case with John Boatwright and FBI agents. Along with her lawyer, Kathy Patrick willingly sat down with them to be questioned.
Did you ask Kathy Patrick flat out, did you murder Carolyn Abel?
Yes, I did.
What did she say?
She said she did not.
And did you present her with what her roommate had said?
Yes.
And what did she say about that?
Simply, it wasn't true.
And did Kathy try to shift blame at all? Did she point the finger of suspicion at all at Sandra?
Not with me.
Kathy also denied under oath that she was in love with Carolyn Abel.
Do you believe Kathy Patrick lied to you?
There was enough indication of that to justify us doing further investigation, yes. My strategy at that point was, if the Koreans did not prosecute her, then to look whether we could for basically false statements, perjury, obstruction of justice.
Even though lie detector tests are inadmissible in federal court, they are a tool used by investigators to confirm deception. Kathy Patrick willingly agreed to take one and answer questions about Carolyn's murder.
The examiner concluded that she was deceptive.
And deception is?
Lying.
Lying. After the polygraph, Kathy Patrick, whom South Korea still wanted to arrest for murder, was free to leave.
Is that frustrating?
It was very frustrating.
Compounding Carolyn's family's grief, Sandra Ames was released from a South Korean prison after serving just 6 months of her one-year sentence. And it wasn't because of good behavior.
Is it true you got out of prison because someone bribed a judge to get you out?
Yep, absolutely.
We just couldn't believe it. I mean, 6 months for assisting a murderer and covering up the crime scene and making it look like a burglary and not even telling anybody, not talking. I don't understand.
When Sandra returned to the United States, she was recruited by the FBI to go undercover and secretly record a reunion with Kathy Patrick in hopes of eliciting a confession.
I didn't even call. I simply went to her house.
And what does she say to you? Sandra, what are you doing here?
Probably. And I think I said something along the lines of, how could you have done that? How could you have killed Carolyn? And she said, I don't know what you're talking about.
Without incriminating statements from Kathy, the feds were not able to press charges for perjury.
As long as she stays within these borders, she's a free woman.
That's correct, yes.
And with no extradition treaty in place, South Korean authorities put the murder case on the shelf.
I think the South Koreans were taking the attitude that this is a U.S. problem. It's 2 U.S. citizens.
Meanwhile, Carolyn's family carried on with their quest for justice.
My dad contacting every congressman, every senator. He wrote to news stations, 60 Minutes, because he was hoping that if that happened, then there would be more publicity, more pressure.
While Kathy Patrick carried on with her life.
If it is true that Kathy Patrick murdered your sister, is she a danger today to the public?
I think she probably is. And who knows what would trigger that kind of violence again.
Kathy declined to meet with 48 Hours, So we went to her in Bellingham, Washington, where today she's a counselor at Western Washington University.
Okay, guys. We're going to make our move now to Kathy Patrick's office. Hi, Kathy Patrick. Hi, Peter Van Sant with CBS News.
My sister never got to live her life. Why does Kathy get to live a full life?
For almost 3 decades, Kathy Patrick has lived a quiet life in Bellingham, Washington, north of Seattle, where for the last 18 years, she has worked as a student advisor at Western Washington University.
Okay, this is the building. Okay, so when we get in, let's move quickly to her office.
Kathy turned down our request for an interview, saying Carolyn's murder was too painful to talk about. But on this day, her past was fast approaching.
Hi, Kathy Patrick. Peter Van Sant with CBS News. There are investigators from 2 countries that have now are certain that you murdered Carolyn Abel. What do you have to say?
I have to say that I'm innocent and that I don't know what happened after I found Carolyn's body.
These are Kathy Patrick's first public words on the murder of Carolyn Abel in 30 years.
Now, your roommate says just the opposite, that you confessed to her and that the 2 of you then went back over to Carolyn's apartment and staged the scene as a burglary.
No.
That never happened.
No.
So she's lying to us when she told us that?
I believe she is.
You flunked a polygraph test. How did that happen?
I don't know the science of polygraphs. I'm not surprised that I would flunk it in retrospect, given how clammy and nervous I am right now, and I'm even shaking. It was a frightening experience, and I absolutely do not know what happened before I went to her apartment and found her body. Please.
It has been 30 years since this. Isn't it time to come clean about this? Investigators are certain that you committed this murder.
They are wrong.
If you didn't, who did?
I believe it must have been Ames.
Sandra Ames. She says you did it, and you had her go over and help manipulate the room to make it look like a burglary.
That's not true.
Another circumstance in all of this is that people have...
You want these people to leave?
Can we stop right now?
These are important questions to be asked about this. There were 30 stab wounds on Carolyn's body, and friends say that you attacked her after she rejected you, your romantic advances.
No, this has to stop now, please. You're really sidelining me here, and I'm not prepared to answer questions here at my place of work. This happened 30 years ago. I have been available to investigators in Korea and in the U.S.
In her interviews with South Korean police, a deposition, and a polygraph test with American investigators, Kathy Patrick did not point a finger at Sandra Ames. Stephen Schroeder had a question about that for Kathy.
Well, why didn't you tell us that 29 years ago?
When we recently contacted Sandra Ames, she told us she wasn't surprised that Kathy tried to blame her and denied having participated in Carolyn's murder.
If it went to trial, I would be willing to testify. I would need to testify.
Where should Kathy Patrick be today, in your opinion?
She should be in prison. Plain and simple.
Thanks to the Abel family's lobbying efforts, in 1994, Congress passed a law that allows for the U.S. prosecution of U.S. nationals who kill other Americans in foreign countries.
And so today, American families, if their loved ones are murdered abroad by an American, will have a very different experience than Carolyn Abel's family did. And I think I think we all owe them a debt of gratitude.
But in Carolyn Abel's case, any trial seems highly unlikely. In South Korea, the statute of limitations for her murder has expired. And the Abel family says investigators told them the physical evidence in the case has been destroyed. Evidence that would have been crucial for a trial in the United States.
No one should have to go through what my family went through. How do we live in a world where a U.S. citizen can go murder a U.S. citizen and then come back and live like nothing happened? That's the outrage of this.
In a case where nothing is simple, the long path to justice may never reach its destination.
I honestly can't picture her old. Because she was just always so vibrant and so energetic, and I think she still would be. You know, I miss her. She was like my best friend.
We've all continued our lives as adventurous people, but, you know, we kind of carry the memory of Carolyn behind us, whatever ground we walk on. It's hard not to remember that there's another one of us who could be out there on the same path.
"48 Hours." Don't miss an episode.
People perceive me as being a billionaireess and this entitled, spoiled, rich girl. And this wild, crazy party girl that's hanging from rafters. That's not it at all. I'm a businesswoman, I'm a mother, I'm a friend, I'm a wife. There are a few that think that I'm a murderer.
Surely the crime of the young decade, a respected senior officer dead.
He was hoping to be promoted to senior superintendent, but the Lord or God wanted to promote him to become an angel.
My brother, he was playful. He was a very happy person.
Henry Gemot, from everything we know, was a very jovial guy.
He loved his family. He loved sports. He loved music. He go all the way for his friend.
Henry was my friend. That was an accident, a terrible accident. It will haunt me for the rest of my life.
The shooting took place where?
At that dock.
These two people wind up on a lonely pier in the dark together. Why are they there?
I remember saying, "You really need your gun? We're going right here to the pier," and he's like, "I always have my gun." And so he brought it with him. The moon was beautiful. So we just wanted to come sit by the pier, put our feet in the water.
Was there anyone else on that pier besides the two of you?
No.
Did you have a finger around the trigger?
Not that I thought. I just remember trying to see. Next thing I know, the gun went off. He fell on top of me, and all I could feel was warmth, and I later then realized he was bleeding on me.
She feels this warmth. You know, when we talk about warmth, we think about warm cookies or a blanket. We don't think about the warmth of death.
Didn't know if he was dead. There's not a night that goes by I don't dream about that incident and relive it.
People are wondering, was this an accident? Was this murder?
Jasmine Hartin was arraigned in the San Pedro Magistrates Court on a single charge of manslaughter by negligence.
My brother was shot behind the ear, execution style. She should be charged for murder. Murder. Murder.
I'm not a murderer. That's ridiculous.
Miss Hartin, do you have anything to say?
My freedom is at stake. My relationship with my children is at stake.
Why won't you let me see the kids, Andrew?
She gave so many stories. So who knows when she's telling the truth?
I think a lot of people misjudge me.
Her name is Jasmine Hartin. Seen by many as one of the most wealthy and controversial people
They don't see my wholesome side.
in one of the most alluring places on earth.
When I decided to come to Belize, I thought that I was moving from the cold north into a paradise.
Belize is a tiny Central American tourist mecca that's also a haven for the super rich, where jet setters and beachcombers rub elbows every day. And it's where Jasmine, 32, was raising twins with her partner Andrew Ashcroft, a real estate developer and son of a British billionaire.
A woman with one of the most prominent names on the island is at the police station.
I've never had a story like this before.
Charisse Halsall is a news reporter and anchor at Channel 7 in Belize and a CBS News consultant. She has been covering the case since it broke on May 28, 2021.
Reports tonight are that Hartin was splattered in the officer's blood.
Authorities detained Jasmine Hartin after finding her dazed and drenched in blood on a deserted pier near her exclusive beachfront resort home.
It's a mystery for which the intrigue is escalating.
In the water was Police Superintendent Henry Jamont with a fatal gunshot wound behind his right ear. A man beloved by his 5 children and, says his sister Cherry, by the country he'd spent his life serving.
He had done a great job for the country of Belize.
We will purchase shoes for some of the needy kids within the villages around.
With a respected police officer dead and a wealthy, powerful woman in a concrete jail cell, there were rampant rumors about Jasmine Hartin and Henry Jamont. Were drugs or infidelity involved? The speculation was fueled by reports that Jasmine's account of that night had changed. According to Channel 7, the first account she told was the fatal shot may have come from a passing boat.
Why would she have ever told such a wild story about a boat?
After a jailhouse visit with a lawyer, Hartin admitted she fired the fatal shot, accidentally. Hartin was charged with manslaughter by negligence and eventually released on bail.
The things that are at stake right now is my relationship with my children, my freedom, my business, my money, my character, my reputation, and my life is at stake.
Tonight, you will hear Jasmine Hartin tell her side of the story. It's a story that begins in her childhood. She insists she was never a spoiled rich kid.
I think because I grew up the way I did, all of that has prepared me for what I've just endured.
She says she grew up poor in Canada as one of 9 siblings in a small farming community.
Do you remember being hungry as a child?
Of course, yeah, many times.
Jasmine's mother, Candace Castiglione, says food was in such short supply, she'd trick a local donut shop to give her stale pastries to feed her kids.
I went in and told them I was a pig farmer. I needed the donuts for my pigs. The kids thought it was awesome.
She went to high school in a hard-scrabble neighborhood of Kingston, Ontario, and set her sights on a career in dentistry, hoping to help the needy.
I started to do dental missions.
And Belize?
I saw an opportunity to come down and do a mission here for dentistry.
She arrived in Belize in 2014. She set up shop on an exclusive island called Ambergris Caye and made a splash on the social scene, acquiring a reputation as a party girl. And in 2015, she met someone who would change her life. By then, she was working as a realtor, and he was a potential client.
There was something intriguing about his level of confidence.
It was Andrew Ashcroft.
I thought he was very clever, very funny, very witty.
Andrew is a son of Lord Michael Ashcroft, a well-known conservative political figure in his native Great Britain, who'd built a billion-dollar business empire with extensive holdings in Belize. They reportedly have included ownership stakes in the phone company, 2 of the biggest banks, a TV station, even the main port.
Once you learned that Andrew Ashcroft is the son of a billionaire, how did that impact you in your relationship?
So I was curious about it.
Were you in any way attracted to his wallet?
No.
But the potential.
I wanted to build something together. I wanted us to be partners.
They got engaged in 2016, and the next year had twins, Charlie and Ella. It was just months earlier at a brunch that Jasmine had met the other man who'd become a central figure in her future, a high-ranking police official on the island, Henry Jamot.
Henry's a lot of fun, and we would get together often with groups.
Jasmine says he was on the island for about another year before being transferred, and they got to know each other well.
He loved his food, loved my cooking, often came to the house for dinner.
She says Andrew Ashcroft already knew Henry, so Jamot's name was on the invite list in May 2021 when the couple cut the ribbon on their professional dream.
Thank you.
A Marriott-branded resort worth millions. It was just weeks before the shooting.
For Jasmine and I, it marks the fulfillment of a dream to create the Elia Resort.
Jasmine Hartin seemed to have it all. Opulent lifestyle, lovely family, and links to a powerful dynasty. Her life may have looked perfect, but she says by then, behind the curtains of the 5-bedroom beachfront condo she shared with Andrew and the children, there was trouble.
Andrew and I have had a very rocky road.
They tried to make it work, says Jasmine, though they never officially married.
We weren't even sleeping in the same rooms.
And she says they were essentially leading separate lives. So on a dark night in May 2021, when Jasmine Hartin suddenly found herself in trouble at a party, she called for her friend, Henry Jamot.
I said, please come pick me up. This is bad.
Set the scene for us. This is a very special place for you.
Yeah, it used to be a very special place, but now brings back a lot of very sad, sad memories. This is Grand Colony. So that building in the back is where I lived.
At the glittering center of Jasmine Hartin's world was a fantasy. The luxurious beachfront hotels of the Ashcroft Empire in San Pedro on Ambergris Caye, Belize.
San Pedro is where all that money comes in, rolls in, and rolls out.
Here, accommodations can go for upwards of $1,000 a night. It is just a few barefoot steps across the sand but a world away from everyday life in this Central American nation, where the average salary is around $800 a month.
There's an element of race in that expats do not tend to socialize within the Black community.
I'm standing in front
But
of the
reporter Charisse Housall says Jasmine Hartin and Henry Jamot's life journeys cut a path that straddled both worlds.
Henry Jamot is friends with a wide range of Belizean society.
As at ease with the Ashcrofts and their enormous wealth as he was with the working class people he grew up with.
You called him king.
Yes.
He's the king.
Yes, he's the king. My parents named him king because he's one and only boy in the family.
A king who followed in the footsteps of his sister Cherry.
Yes, we are both police officers.
And was your brother a good cop?
A very good cop, very strict.
We're trying to bridge the gap between the community and the police.
Henry Jamot is an upstanding officer.
And I believe that by us...
A senior police official and a family man. Dedicated father to 4 girls and a boy. Son, brother, friend to many, like Gene Lopez.
He was a big fella, but he was friendly but stern.
Tell me about the Henry that you knew.
He would assist anybody if they need assistance.
He is a very good man, loved by many. He have extended his love beyond the family limits.
Did you become good friends?
Well, yes. The more I got to know him, we had a lot in common.
There has been a lot of talk around Belize that you and Henry Jamot were more than friends, that you may have been lovers.
That's not true. That's not true at all.
You guys never had a sexual relationship.
No.
Still, the nature of their relationship would become the heart of this story.
And the question is, what was such a prominent man, prominent yes, but working class, middle class, doing on a pair with someone who's from the 0.01% of wealthy expats? It just seemed like a mashup and a friendship that almost shouldn't exist.
Whatever their relationship, it was Jasmine's reliance on the man known as King that set in motion the final days of Henry Jamot's life. It was May 22nd, 2021. Jasmine says she was at a party some 70 miles from home.
A man followed me into the room and was quite aggressive with me.
Verbally, physically?
Physically, in a sexual manner. So in that moment, I fought him off me. I called Jamot right away.
The man Jasmine calls her protector didn't hesitate.
He drove an hour to come pick me up, and he kept saying, we need to really work on getting your firearms license.
She says Henry Jamot wanted her to have a gun for protection.
And you agreed to that?
Yes.
And when he had that conversation, did he show you his Glock pistol?
Yes. He wanted me to handle it, to get a feel for it.
This is what a Glock 17 looks like.
When you got home, did you share what happened to you with Andrew?
No, we weren't really sharing a lot with each other at all.
And Henry Jamot posted on Facebook that he was now single.
He posted something about being single like after 14 years.
And so, some 3 days later, it was Jasmine's turn to help her friend.
The next thing I know, I get a text message from Henry saying, hey, can you hook me up at Grand Colony? I need to come out there for a couple days and just blow off some steam.
He checked in on Wednesday, May 26.
Correct.
The next day, Henry went fishing with his best friend, Francisco Penny Arceo.
He was happy as happy. I said, so what's up tonight? He said, well, I have a date. I said, who? He said, that one, I'm taking it to my grave. But he was smiling when he told me that.
Were you that date?
That's hard to say. If he called me a date, he may have just been pulling their leg or exaggerating truth. I'm not sure, but I'm definitely not a date.
She says Andrew was supposed to join them, but as a full moon settled over the tropical Caribbean night, Jasmine met Henry alone.
I had a police report that Superintendent Jamot had been killed on a pier in San Pedro.
Just offshore from this pier, floating in the dark Caribbean Sea, Henry Jamot, shot dead.
Next thing I know, the police are there.
She had called the police herself. They took her into custody, where Jasmine reportedly spun her first version of how Henry Jamot died.
Her story is that a passing boat shot Jamot.
And that story is from Jasmine herself.
From Jasmine herself.
I don't remember saying that. Like, it was such a blur. You know, and I think I was in shock.
Were you intentionally trying to mislead police at that moment?
No.
To protect yourself?
No, not at all.
Later on the day of the shooting, Henry Jamot's body was brought across the shimmering waters and home by his best friend, Pani, in this same boat they'd been fishing in just a day before.
And I said, can't be, cannot be. I'm still hurt, still bothered, still very hurt.
You were crying.
Yeah, of course, yes.
The king was dead. The woman with connections to a wealthy, powerful family sat in a cell at the police station. And then reportedly, that story she told about the bullet fired from the boat began to change.
It's past midnight now. At the end of the pier, what happens?
There are only two people who know what happened on that pier on Ambergris Key. One is forever silenced, allegedly shot with his own gun, a Glock 17 like this one.
42-year-old Superintendent of Police Henry Jamot is dead.
More than 2 days after being taken into police custody, the other person in this twisted drama, Jasmine Hartin, made a startling admission.
You have admitted shooting and killing Henry Jamot.
Yes, so...
But let me just finish my question. Was it an accident or was it murder?
It was absolutely not murder. Henry was my friend. That day changed everyone's lives.
Documents from the cops, courts, and forensic experts in Jasmine Hartin's case have not been made public. So much of her account of that night cannot be independently corroborated. She told her story in detail for the first time on TV to 48 Hours.
How did you and Henry Jamot end up on that pier?
Well, we were sitting on the balcony of Unit 1, which is oceanfront.
She says they were drinking.
Cinnamon whiskey, yeah. He took his like a shot, you know, I was sipping on mine. Then we went, it was a full moon, the stars were gorgeous. So we decided, let's go down and sit on the pier. We were sitting on the edge, our legs kind of dangling, just talking.
As he'd done after rescuing her from that party, Jasmine says Henry Jamot again pulled out his 9mm Glock 17 and handed it to her.
I am not an expert with 9mm by any means.
So Jasmine says Henry began teaching her how to eject and reload the magazine clip and bullets.
He said, let's see if you can unload the clip, reload it. So helped me get the clip out. I was unloading it. Then he took the bullets and put them beside him. I was under the impression that the gun was completely empty at that time.
It doesn't make sense to people. Why are you doing this in the darkness?
It just kind of happened in that moment.
Jasmine claims Henry was a little inebriated, but says she wasn't.
I had had a few drinks, yeah. I wasn't drunk.
It's past midnight now. We're approaching
Yes.
12:45 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
What happens? What unfolds?
We're sitting on the end of the pier together. He makes a comment about how his shoulder's really stiff. And he's like, just rub my shoulder. So I kind of scooched back behind him.
Jasmine says she agreed to give Henry Jamot a shoulder massage. And then,
let's head inside, he said. So I said, okay. So he has the bullets to his left. He asked me to hand him the clip from the gun. And that's when I picked it up. I'm still kind of behind him a little bit. Like he's sitting like this, I'm kind of sitting like this.
Who's holding the gun at that point?
Me. So I reach for the gun to take the magazine or the clip out because he was going to reload it. He had the bullets there. And all of a sudden it went off, and yeah, it's hard to talk about it still.
Take me through that moment by moment.
So I lean over, I pick up the gun, and I'm trying to click out the magazine, and it's not working. So I'm holding it like this, and I'm trying to use the moonlight or whatever to see if I'm clicking the right button.
Jasmine says the barrel of the gun was pointed to the left, where Henry was sitting.
Next thing I know, the gun went off.
And did you have a finger around the trigger?
Not that I thought.
Somehow you must have pulled the trigger.
I don't know. I mean, it was an accident or the gun misfired, but consciously did I pull the trigger? No.
She says Henry Jamot never made a sound.
So the shot went off and he fell on top of me, and all I could feel was warmth, and I later then realized he was bleeding on me.
Jasmine says after the shot, she struggled to get out from under Henry.
I was shaking him. I didn't know what to do. As I'm trying to wiggle my way free to render aid, his body was slipping into the water from the dock. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if he was dead.
She says it took time to make sense of what had happened.
It was a horrible accident.
Taking Jasmine into custody, authorities discovered she was carrying a small amount of cocaine. They didn't charge her with possession that night because it hadn't been tested yet.
Had you used cocaine that evening?
No.
Do you use cocaine? Do you have a drug problem?
I definitely do not have a drug problem at all. And I will say that the substance that they found was not mine.
Whose was it then?
I don't think I can say that.
She said it wasn't hers.
It's in her purse.
Cherry Jamot, the police officer who inspired her younger brother King to get his badge, isn't buying any of it.
Do you believe that your brother, on a darkened night at the end of a pier at 12:45 in the morning, was actually showing her how to use his Glock 9mm pistol?
My brother would never do a thing like that when it comes to firearm. He is so skillful and he is so careful.
You don't believe in any possible way this could have been an accident?
I cannot believe that.
Cherry is hopeful that when the ballistics report is revealed, it will lead prosecutors to upgrade the charge.
Jasmine Hartin should be charged for murder and not manslaughter.
Either way, Jasmine Hartin was about to run into a world of trouble a lot closer to home.
This is absolutely war.
War with the billionaire family she once called her own.
Tonight we continue with the saga of Jasmine Hartin versus Andrew Ashcroft.
Andrew is inside, hiding my kids inside. Why won't you let me see the kids, Andrew? Why won't you let me see the children?
From the swaying palms to the silent roads, journalist Charisse Housall and I went looking for Henry Jamot's hometown roots.
Peter, this is the Hummingbird Highway in Belize, and it's the road to the culture capital, which is Dangriga. That's where Henry Jamot grew up, and where his family still lives.
We followed the dusty, colorful streets of Dangriga.
Let's stop at that greenhouse there. I'm looking for where Henry Jamot used to live.
And we're led to Henry Jamot's nephew, Edel.
This is it.
He is clear on how his uncle died.
Murder. And the whole family feels that way.
Everybody feels that way.
But authorities charged Jasmine Hartin with manslaughter, not murder. And publicly, investigators have never suggested any motive for her to have intentionally killed Henry.
I had no motive to do that to my friend.
But Henry's family believes the truth is revealed in how and where he was shot.
My brother was shot behind the ear, execution style.
That shot echoed through a town famous for its music and drums, the beat Henry Jamot loved, the heritage he was passing on to his children.
We're getting close to the church where Henry Jamot's funeral was held.
As he had in life, the 42-year-old public servant united the people of Belize.
Wherever he goes, wherever he did, he shared that love with all of us.
But how to comfort sisters who lost the brother they lovingly called king? And how to answer 6-year-old Henry III's question.
How comes my dad haven't called me?
While Henry Jamot was mourned by a nation, Jasmine Hartin was getting a different kind of attention. And, according to a prison official,
the 32-year-old, who will be dealt with like any other untried prisoner, will become the only Caucasian among 1,041 inmates.
Still, the people of Belize couldn't help but wonder if Jasmine's race, stature, and wealth might benefit her. Then she was locked up for 13 days.
My cell was infested with cockroaches.
Miss Hartin, do you have anything to say?
When she finally made bail, roughly $15,000 US, it was paid for by an employee of the Ashcrofts. But Jasmine was already getting the feeling that her partner Andrew wanted her out of sight.
The day that I got out, I was expecting to be reunited with my children at home, but instead I was sent to a house in the middle of nowhere by myself, without my children, without a phone.
Andrew arranged for the house and for the twins to visit, but Jasmine claims he only allowed them to see her one time. Andrew claims Jasmine left the house before he could arrange another visit.
And being apart from your children, what has that been like for you?
That's one that will get me to cry.
2 weeks after making bail, Jasmine tried to visit the twins herself.
My son and my daughter.
At the Grand Colony, where she had lived with Andrew Ashcroft. It was then that chaos broke out.
So this is me recording.
This is part of the video Jasmine shot.
Andrew's running so I can't see my children. Security is literally stopping me from seeing my children right now.
In a statement, Andrew later wrote that Jasmine was shouting and cursing and behaving aggressively toward the hotel staff.
You've been instructed by Andrew to stop me from seeing my children. That's correct? He's inside hiding. Why won't you let me see the children?
She is startled 2 days later when she's arrested again, this time for assaulting a hotel staff member that day.
All I did was try to collect my personal belongings and see my children.
And authorities add a charge for cocaine possession from the night of the Henry Jamot shooting.
This is absolutely ridiculous.
Her bail is then revoked, and she's locked up again. But not for long.
Tonight, after 4 more nights behind bars,
Jasmine was out again. Her bail restrictions mandated she check in with police every day. A 4-hour round-trip drive across Belize from where she is staying.
And so when you go in, what do you say?
They asked me a series of questions: where I'm staying, my date of birth.
But this day's check-in, just 2 weeks after the confrontation at the hotel,
Why are you keeping my children from me, Andrew?
would prove anything but routine. Authorities hand her an order to appear at a custody hearing, reciting Andrew's allegations.
For a reason that the mother of the children hardly spends any time with the children. First of all, I was in jail.
Andrew Ashcroft seeks full custody of his children because Jasmine is charged with causing the death of a police officer by negligence, as well as the assault of that hotel employee, and claims
She is addicted to non-prescription and illegal drugs and a habitual drunkard.
it's a vividly different description of the woman Andrew once welcomed into his rarefied world.
In my opinion, this is absolutely war. This is absolutely gloves are off.
The war would be about the custody of the children, a powerful family, and a building international scandal.
Money, power, image, and reputation mean absolutely everything to that family.
Next up in the war of the Ashcrofts, money. According to Jasmine, she's been cut off financially.
You didn't have a bank account, a trust fund, nothing that you could draw upon.
Not at all.
Andrew Ashcroft declined to speak with 48 Hours, and his attorney says with legal proceedings underway, it would be quite ill-advised to grant an interview. The wheels had come off Jasmine Hartin's life in paradise, and she was running scared.
I've been through what I would consider hell on earth.
But the Jamaat family says they're the ones going through hell as they continue to mourn the kind, conscientious man they believe Jasmine murdered.
She gave so many stories, so who knows when she's telling the truth?
Central to Jasmine's story is that she knew very little about handguns and that Henry wanted to teach her. But recently, images have appeared of Jasmine in Belize with a shotgun.
What does that video tell you?
That video tells me that Jasmine is well-versed, have wide knowledge of bigger firearms.
This is you with a semi-automatic rifle.
Yes?
It has a magazine, a clip, so I'm guessing you know how to take out a magazine and reinsert it into a weapon.
That picture was from 2012 when I was at a Las Vegas shooting range. They don't let you load your firearms. What the video doesn't show is that it really was probably my 10th attempt at the watermelon. I'm not very good with firearms.
Jasmine says she knew next to nothing about handguns.
I do not know how to handle a 9mm properly at all, as we can tell.
It would come down to this. Was the gun used to kill Henry Jamaat fired by accident? We asked an expert. Is it easy to accidentally fire this weapon? There's a lot riding on Jasmine Hartin's account of Henry Jamaat's shooting. So we wanted an expert opinion about whether her story lines up.
What are you holding in your hand?
This is a Glock 17 9mm pistol. It's the same type of weapon that was used in the shooting incident that occurred in Belize.
David Katz is a former DEA agent and a veteran firearms instructor who taught at the FBI DEA Academy in Quantico.
If used properly, how safe is a Glock 17?
These are extremely safe.
Katz says Glock handguns are designed to withstand almost any amount of jostling without accidentally firing.
I could bang it, I could drop it, it's not going to go off.
But Katz says there's one notable exception. A potential key to understanding what happened on that pier. We showed him portions of my interview with Jasmine.
I'm trying to get the magazine out.
As you can see from Jasmine's gestures, she says she was fumbling around to release the gun's magazine.
If her finger was on the trigger and the trigger moved to the rear, with 5 pounds of pressure, the gun's going to go bang.
Pulling the trigger on Glock pistols can be easier than on some other handguns, says Katz.
This is a Glock 40.
And accidental trigger pulls could happen to anyone, even to veterans like this DEA agent who accidentally shot himself.
Let me get a sense of how much force it'll take to fire this weapon. feels pretty light to me.
Yeah, it's 5.5 pounds.
Consciously, did I pull the trigger? No.
Even though Jasmine says she doesn't remember,
she had to have pulled the trigger.
There's no doubt about it. She pulled the trigger.
Kat says trigger accidents can result from something called sympathetic contraction, in which contracting one hand muscle triggers others too.
Let's assume you put your finger on the trigger in this position. You squeeze the bottom fingers, your trigger finger is going to similarly squeeze as well.
Another possible factor, alcohol. Jasmine says both she and Henry Jamaat had been drinking that night.
There is no better way to get yourself hurt than by messing with firearms when you are impaired.
I was under the impression that the gun was completely empty at that time.
One or both of them could have unloaded the magazine, says Katz, forgetting there was a bullet ready to fire in the chamber.
Based on what you've heard her say and what you know about the Glock 17, could this have been an accidental shooting?
Yeah, it could have been. It's a troubling story from so many aspects, starting with why she's practicing in the dark. But then when she talks about where her hand was when the round went off, could it have been an accidental discharge? Absolutely, yes.
We don't know what forensics, ballistics, or other tests authorities have conducted. Prosecutors aren't saying.
I have no idea what evidence they have against me because they haven't released any of it yet.
But Jasmine says Henry's sister Cherry confronted her when the two women met by chance in July of 2021.
I said, Jasmine, why did you kill my brother? Her response was, I'm sorry, it was an accident. I told her, Jasmine, you don't know what you have done to my family.
Do you believe you deserve any sort of legal punishment for what happened on that pier?
I believe that it was an accident, and I do accept any punishment that comes my way.
Under Belizean law, she could get as much as 5 years for negligent manslaughter, but also as little as a fine without any more jail time.
It would be an injustice to the family.
Ever since his funeral, Henry Jamaat has watched over his family from a portrait on the wall.
The children would sit in the sofa and they play with him up there.
Jasmine lost custody of her children in 2022 and is not allowed to visit them anymore. And given the enduring mystery of exactly what happened that night, Jasmine Hartin may forever live under a cloud of suspicion.
It's haunting me. I think about how his poor kids must feel being without their dad, and I wish I could take it back.
"48 Hours. Don't miss an episode."
He was brilliant, phenomenally handsome. He was everything that to me symbolized a future with a capital F. And it just clicked. And from that first day, there was never any doubt that we were meant to meet. I saw the outline of the gun. He was going to die that night no matter what.
This is a story about two people, John and Ann Bender, who from the outside world seemed perfect. John Bender was a Wall Street genius and very quickly made upwards of $500 million by the time he was in his early 30s. Their whole worlds were each other, and when they found each other, they really didn't need anything else.
We built the house with the idea of it being our home, to our taste.
They said, let's retreat to Costa Rica, to the deepest part of the rainforest, and set up a nature preserve.
Not many people are willing or want to live in a house that has no walls. Our architect said we were nuts.
You were happy?
I loved it.
And John was happy?
Yes. As happy as John could be.
What you think is paradise isn't necessarily paradise.
John and Ann had problems that money just couldn't fix.
They were living a very inward life. They'd cut off the world.
He had decided that the world would be better off without it. There were no lights on. All I knew is he had a gun, and I tried to get it away from him, and I couldn't, and it went off.
It comes down to basically two people in a room with a gun.
I tried to stop him.
It sure looked like this guy was shot in the back of his head while he was sleeping.
I was framed. I was set up to be accused of the death of my husband. I refuse to give up. I'm just not going to.
"48 Hours, Paradise Lost."
I had accepted the fact that I would have to live the rest of my life with somewhat of a question mark over my head.
Ann Bender has lived under a cloud of suspicion since 2010, when her husband John was shot to death in the Costa Rican rainforest. In 2015, she went to prison for murder, but now says total vindication is so close she can taste it.
I've been waiting a long time for this.
It was in 2001 that the Benders moved to this remote corner of Central America to live an extravagant, idyllic dream.
In a way, this trip is like going home.
It is going home.
Home was this.
That's the house. Oh, my Lord.
Called Boracayan, rising from the middle of the Costa Rican rainforest. It was once Ann and John Bender's vision of paradise. The phrase "over the top" doesn't begin to do this house justice. It's like some bizarre combination of Disneyland, an art museum, and something you'd really only see in a James Bond movie. Does this strike you as astonishing every time you're here, or are you just totally used to it?
I'm used to it by now. It's home.
4 floors.
There he comes.
Oh my goodness, I just saw a bird.
Yeah.
Nearly 50,000 square feet.
This is your kitchen.
Tons of gleaming granite.
Kitchen, that was the dining room. And the living room is on the other side.
And no windows or walls at all.
I think that's one of the things I miss the most, is the sounds of the birds.
Where is the bathroom?
Right here. We built the house to our taste, which is crazy.
John and Ann always had been a bit eccentric, from the moment a friend introduced them in Virginia in 1998.
It was love at first sight for both of us.
The daughter of an international banker, she'd grown up all over the world. And he was smitten. He proposed after just 2 weeks. They married the next year.
We both found in each other a future.
They shared many interests and one unfortunate problem. Both struggled with depression, specifically in Ann's case, with bipolar mood disorder.
I had just been diagnosed with bipolarity.
He could go from being extremely happy to extremely sad very quick.
His friend Pete DeLisi says John hated doctors and dealt with his problems mostly in private.
He was absolutely a genius.
John Bender had been a math and science whiz in high school, then studied physics at the University of Pennsylvania. His looks got him work as a male model, and his smarts helped him beat the odds at the local casinos. He had an unusual talent for making money, a talent that blossomed at the Philadelphia Stock Exchange.
In just about 5 minutes, he developed a way of trading options that had never been done before. And within just a few years, he was one of the top traders.
By the time he was 25, I think he'd amassed about 80 million.
By the time he was in his early 30s, he set up a hedge fund that was worth $500 to $600 million.
Ned Zeman is a reporter and CBS News consultant. He says that by 1998, Bender was looking for both a safe haven for his money and a purpose for his life, and that for all his brilliance and his bank balance, he never really fit in with the Wall Street crowd.
He just walks away from it.
Just walked away.
But not without a plan. He and Ann, both animal lovers, decided to use their fortune to start a refuge for wildlife. In the dense rainforest of Costa Rica, they found the ideal location, 5,000 pristine acres. They named it Boracay, after a native plant.
I mean, this is as out there as you can get.
Setting up a sanctuary for wildlife gave the Benders a sanctuary too, an escape to an extravagant private universe of exotic flowers, animals, and waterfalls. Here, nothing was ordinary, not even the lights in the house. Many were custom made of stained glass.
How many lamps are we talking about here?
Approximately 400.
You just said 400.
Yeah.
She says John thought the lamps would brighten her outlook on the world.
Depression was an immense bond between them. It's a very isolating disease, and people tend to pull away from society.
Although construction of the house brought in running water, reliable electricity, and dozens of jobs to the area, the project and the Benders got a chilly reception.
There was definitely a degree of who are these rich gringos and who the hell do they think they are coming down and doing all of this.
Then came April 2001. It happened on this mountain road. Ann says armed men in an unmarked car forced them onto the shoulder. The men claimed to be police, but wore no uniforms.
I thought it was a kidnapping.
One pulled John from his car, and when he protested,
this guy had fired the gun between John's legs and held up the gun to John's head. I was terrified. That's when our entire lives changed.
She says an attempted break-in at the house months later only made things worse. The couple bought guns, hired guards, and turned the refuge into a virtual fortress. They lived in fear.
It makes me very sad to think back on how painful life could be for him.
In 2005, perhaps trying to right the ship, Bender set up a $70 million trust to manage the refuge and provide for Ann's living expenses. He named this man, attorney Juan Alvarez, to run it. Alvarez was then a trusted advisor. Later, Ann would point to him as a key figure in the events surrounding John's death. But neither the trust, nor the guards, nor the guns stopped the couple's continuing slide into depression. Ann says John saw a psychiatrist but refused antidepressants. She, however, was taking an enormous amount of medication. And by the fall of 2009, says she had all but stopped eating.
I was 40 pounds lighter than I am now.
By the next year, they had become prisoners in their own paradise. The natural beauty that brought them here lost in irrational despair. Anne says John became convinced that every problem, her illness, even the death of a pet bird, was his fault.
He became suicidally depressed.
The stage was set.
He wanted to die.
I'm sure this seems as real to you today as it did that night. So what happened?
John brought a gun to bed.
It was January 7th, 2010.
I opened my eyes and I saw the outline of the trigger of the gun, and he had it pointed at his head, at himself.
Horrified, Ann Bender says she recognized their 9mm Ruger pistol.
From what I could tell, he was holding it with both hands.
And what'd you do?
I got up on my knees and reared towards him, and I tried to grab the gun.
Were you able to get it?
No. I was able to get my hands around his, and the gun slipped, and it went off.
Just minutes later, their security guard, Oswaldo Aguilar, was first on the scene.
Me dijo con palabras.
She said to me, I tried to stop him, and I couldn't do it, he told us.
Was there a long struggle?
No.
Was it just almost instantaneous?
I remember it as being instantaneous. It couldn't have been any more than 2 seconds.
When it went off, who was holding it?
I don't think anyone was holding it.
How does a gun go off when no one's holding it?
I think that it fell. He dropped it. I never touched the gun.
Ann told roughly the same story to the first responders who arrived here at Boracay some 2 hours later. But reporter Ned Zeman says that their examination of the scene actually raised more questions than it answered.
Why does somebody who's suicidal shoot himself back here? They said, first of all, that John was left-handed. And how does a left-handed person lying in bed shoot himself here?
Prosecutor Edgar Ramirez has a simple answer. He doesn't. If somebody wanted to commit suicide, he says, the way they do it is here, here, or here. But if a left-handed person did fatally shoot himself behind the right ear, the gun presumably would end up on the same side as the bullet hole.
Just to be clear, the gun is on the opposite side from the wound.
Yes, the wound is on this side of John's head. He's laying on his back. The gun is over there on this side of his bed, near his arm. So, you know, that doesn't look good.
There were no lights on. All I knew is he had a gun, and I tried to get it away from him, and I couldn't, and it went off.
But investigators puzzled over the bullet's path, entering just below the right ear and ending up behind the left eye. Odd, too, was the location of a spent cartridge, found some 13 feet behind the bed. All, they thought, inconsistent with Ann's story of a struggle.
Did you move anything, touch anything, change anything in that room?
The only thing I remember doing is using the radio, unlocking the elevator, and touching John.
But as far as the gun, the shell casings, the pillow?
I don't remember anything.
A pillow near John's head had a tear with gunpowder in it, which means the pillow was positioned over his head and the gun was fired, the prosecutor told us. Within hours, investigators began to think John Bender may have been shot in his sleep and died where he lay. There were pools of blood on both sides of his body. The earplugs he always wore still in place.
Al iniciar nosotros la segunda inspección,
Starting from the 4th floor down, we started looking, says Inspector Luis Aguilar, who led a sweep of the house and quickly discovered something that stopped him cold.
al terminar las diligencias nuestras,
We found a great amount of jewels, precious stones, gems, thousands of them, diamonds, rubies, opals, some on display, others in suitcases, worth roughly $20 million.
When you talk about the jewelry collection, you know, I have jewelry. I don't think that's what you're talking about.
No, in no way, shape, or form.
Investigators didn't see it as a jewelry collection either. To them, it looked a lot more like a smuggling operation.
Do you think that the fact that when the police got here, they find all these amazing jewels, do you think that it prejudiced them? You know,
So what? Strange doesn't mean that you're a criminal.
Anne says the gems were merely a hobby and an investment, and says she did her best to cooperate that night.
I was falling to pieces.
Within hours of John's death, after calling her family and Juan Alvarez, the trustee of Boracay,
I went into some sort of shock mode.
She was rushed to the hospital, emaciated and covered with sores.
My understanding is they were giving me a 40% chance of survival for the first 2 weeks.
What was her condition then?
Terrible.
In what way?
Dehydrated, extremely thin.
Her psychiatrist, Carlos Lozano, who Anne authorized to speak with us, met her in intensive care just hours later.
Was she in touch with reality?
In and out.
Do you think she was even physically capable of doing what the prosecution alleged?
No. Anne could not even hold a fork when she was here.
Ann Bender would remain hospitalized for 7 months under Dr. Lozano's care and under a growing cloud of suspicion.
They were beginning to say, this doesn't look like an accident, this doesn't look like suicide, this looks like a lot like a murder, and they began looking at her as a suspect.
Did you for 1 second until it actually happened think that you were going to be charged?
No.
She was skin and bones. I mean, she looked horrid.
The Benders' friend Paul Meyer visited Anne in the hospital just days after her arrival. She weighed 84 pounds.
She literally looked like someone who had just walked out of a concentration camp.
Sick or not, she already was investigators' #1 murder suspect. Police confiscated her clothes and her computer, but it's unclear if they examined John's messages or ever saw these chilling excerpts, dated just weeks before he died. I wish I were effing dead, it reads. I feel so effing horrible, I want to kill everyone, and then myself. A window, Anne says, on a tormented soul.
John was the most tortured person I've ever met. He had been wanting to kill himself for weeks.
She thinks the lawyers Bender trustee Juan Alvarez hired for her should have used John's messages in her defense. They wouldn't comment on strategy.
They never manifested that I was innocent.
So their position was, oh yeah, she did do this.
By not doing anything, they were making it inevitable that I would be charged.
19 months after Bender died, Anne was officially charged with murder. Convinced the gems had been smuggled into the country, authorities later also charged her with possessing contraband. All, she is sure, just what Juan Alvarez wanted. Why? To hide the fact, she claims, that he had siphoned money from the $70 million Bender Trust.
I'm the only person that can stop him or bring scrutiny into what he's done.
In July 2012, with murder charges hanging over her head, Ann Bender took Juan Alvarez to court for fraud. The suit claimed Alvarez used the Bender Trust as his personal piggy bank. buying horses for his horse farm, and paying his credit card bills. Authorities raided his office and confiscated 135 boxes of documents. The court then removed Alvarez as trustee. This investigation will go nowhere because the accusations are bogus, he told us. But whatever Juan Alvarez did or did not do, he did not shoot John Bender. And prosecutors see Ann's lawsuit as an attempt to distract them from their firm belief that she did.
They just didn't see how that gunshot could have been in that part of his head by suicide.
Was this suicide or an accident or murder? The forensic evidence is so vital in this case.
It's incredible.
We brought in outside experts to Boracay and asked them to take a look at it.
This was the bedroom. This is where John Bender died.
In the rarefied world of forensic science,
you can see there's a lot of blood on the crime scene.
Selma and Richard Eikelenboom are internationally recognized but sometimes controversial experts. Known for stirring debate in high-profile cases once thought open and shut.
Like this and this one.
From the start, they say, some Costa Rican authorities had a preconceived idea that this was murder.
The pathology report is very straight from the beginning. This is a homicide, and let's prove it's a homicide.
Yeah. He does look like he's sleeping.
A lot of people who die with their eyes closed look like they're sleeping, and they might have been wide awake when it happened.
The prosecutor said, if you're going to shoot yourself, everyone knows it's here or it's here or it's here.
Well, that's completely unscientific. If that's an example of the logic they used in this case, then I'm really very worried.
They cite other monumental mistakes. Not immediately testing for gunpowder residue, not fingerprinting the gun, not testing the sheets for blood spatter.
What is the most vital thing that they missed?
I think the trajectory. Then you can place the shooter on the scene in relation to the victim.
It's like this.
They told us the trajectory, the path the bullet followed, was critical to understanding where the gun was when it was fired and if Ann or John fired it.
Looking at this investigation, how would you grade it?
Very poor.
In January 2013, a 3-judge panel acquitted Ann Bender of murder. She was safe. But not for long. After her acquittal, Ann Bender hoped for a new start. But never thought of leaving Costa Rica, moving instead to a small apartment. When the trust stopped paying her bills, friends and family helped. She began dating a new boyfriend, another American, Greg Fisher.
She has never not done what his court system has asked her to do, never not done what his government has asked her to do.
So she says she was shocked in May 2014 when the Costa Rican government put her on trial for murder a second time.
It may seem odd to Americans, but in Costa Rica, there is no double jeopardy rule. So if a prosecutor doesn't like a verdict, he can appeal. And if he wins, try the defendant all over again, with the same charges, the same evidence, and the same witnesses.
El cual le produjo la muerte instantánea.
This time, there are new judges. But prosecutors repeat their case, arguing that the evidence from the body, the bullet casing, the entry wound, blood stains, and pillowcase prove this was murder.
No había persona.
Defense attorney Fabio Oconotrio is just as insistent it was suicide.
In all homicide, there's a reason. In this case, there's no reason.
And in a risky move, he decides there is nobody better able to make that point than Ann Bender herself.
I want to make a statement.
And make a statement she certainly does.
I was so happy here when we moved here.
She stays on the stand the entire day.
He was talking about suicide every day for at least 4 weeks. It was an issue of getting through every day.
You seem to be saying that there was no way to prevent him from attempting suicide.
I tried my hardest.
I'm not saying just no way for you. There was no avenue open.
No.
Period. This was destined to be.
He wanted to die.
Estaba en esta posición.
In his testimony, security guard and first responder Oswaldo Aguilar describes the scene, but he also raises questions about one of the prosecutor's key assumptions.
The main point of evidence for the prosecution was John was left-handed. The bullet wound is behind the right side of his head. You're lying in bed. How does a suicidal man possibly end up shooting himself like this?
Aguilar has an answer, pointing out that though a lefty, John Bender carried his gun on the right side.
Sí la portaba al lado derecho.
But testifying for the prosecution, forensic pathologist Gretchen Flores doesn't care if John Bender was right or left-handed. She insists suicide is inconceivable. Another person, she says, would have to fire the weapon. Her conclusion from the blood evidence and the position of the body, John Bender never saw the shot coming.
Okay, it's 6 centimeters from the midline.
At Boracay, our independent forensics experts, Richard and Selma Eichenbaum, tested that idea that John's body never moved.
It would explain the blood we find over here, but it doesn't explain the blood over there.
In their view, it had to have moved for the blood to have pooled as it did on both sides of his body.
So his head was completely different. This was the position of his head when he was shot.
The blood pattern analysis support the hypothesis that there was some sort of fight.
They showed us how a struggle could have happened, how Ann's efforts to get the gun could make it fire.
Well, the vehicle goes like this, and he starts bleeding, oozing.
How John's body then might have moved.
And he slowly falls back in this position.
Which accounts for the blood on this side.
On this side?
I lunged forward towards him with my hands. I fell towards the center of the bed, and the gun went off.
The hypothesis that he was shot in the position he was found is not supported by this evidence.
Also unlikely, the Eichenbaums say, is the prosecutor's theory that Ann shot her husband from behind the bed.
This trajectory is not very likely.
It doesn't make any sense.
No, I mean, just look at me. If I would shoot him through the head, I would go like this.
And they showed us why they think the odd location of the spent cartridge, such damning proof, according to the prosecution, really proves nothing at all. The casing can end up in that position if the gun is twisted far enough around.
Correct.
There is no chance she murdered her husband.
Ann's family and friends want to make sure the judges think so too.
If I thought Ann had anything to do with this, in any way, shape, or form, I wouldn't be here.
But for Ned Zeman, the case is no longer clear. So you can see a scenario where it's an accident?
Yes.
Where it's suicide?
Yes.
And where it might be murder? You can see all these?
Yes, I absolutely can. And I think anybody who sat in that courtroom would probably say the same thing, except for maybe Ann and her attorney, because any of those makes sense.
In his closing, Prosecutor Ramirez insists there is only one plausible scenario. Ann Bender shot her husband. Defense attorney Ocono Trio pleads for reason, saying Ann is not an assassin. Facing a possible 25 years in prison, Ann herself has the last word.
I did not kill John.
But even after 4 years and 2 trials, she is unprepared for this verdict. Translation: guilty of murder.
La única persona que pudo haber realizado dicho disparo es la imputada.
Her friends and family sit stunned. She is sentenced immediately to 22 years in prison, and she is led away.
I really don't remember much after that, except the police officers surrounding me.
Her boyfriend, Greg Fisher, is devastated.
I don't think she's going to live. I don't think she's going to survive.
The reality that I could be here for 22 years, have I accepted that? I don't think there's any way that I can.
La única persona que pudo haber realizado dicho disparo, Ann Maxine Peyton.
Immediately after being sentenced to 22 years for murder, Ann Bender appealed her conviction.
There's no evidence that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that I killed John. The evidence doesn't exist.
We met with her 6 weeks later in prison.
I'm still surviving, and I refuse to give up. I'm just not going to.
And giving up in this place would be tempting. There are about 50 women per room, 3 toilets, no hot water. No privacy.
None. Zero. Nada.
And no guarantee she won't spend the rest of her life behind bars. How did you fight back from something like that when in those surroundings?
You survive. You do what you gotta do.
Then, in the winter of 2015, after 9 months in prison, a development almost as stunning as Ann's conviction. She wins her appeal. The court annuls the verdict. She will have to face yet another trial, but she is released for now. She learns all this from a friendly guard.
I said, "You're kidding, I can leave?" And she said, "Yeah, you're free." I fell to the ground, I just lost it.
But in this story, bad news always seems to follow the good. And Ann soon learns she is not off the hook. Prosecutors have decided to try her for a 3rd time. Her 3rd trial begins about 6 months later. And not only is Ann physically more fragile than ever, she has suffered a major personal setback. Her boyfriend, Greg Fisher, died of an asthma attack while she was in prison. But at this trial, there is no shortage of people to lean on. Ann's parents, her best friend, Celine.
She's the best human being that I've ever met.
A lot of people that are close to me are very invested in my getting out of this.
John Bender's old friend, Pete DeLisi, has called in legal reinforcements too. 2 lawyers from the UK and 2 from the US. Paid by Ann, they'll advise her local attorney and closely monitor the trial, making sure the judges know they're watching. Ann's biggest challenge may be just holding herself together in court.
Doña Ann va a declarar. Y Doña Ann,
in contrast to her day-long testimony in previous trials, she is on the stand for only 2 hours. And this time, she tries to appeal to the judges by testifying in Spanish. Once again, telling her story is an emotional ordeal. Prosecutor Edgar Ramirez's approach to this trial is much the same. But he appears to be minus several key witnesses, including his star, medical examiner Gretchen Flores. She has mysteriously gone missing.
Como vacaciones profilácticas, que es la información que yo tengo de la oficina de ellos.
And supporters call it an obvious delaying tactic.
It's part of their strategy. They drag this out as long as they can so that everyone leaves.
But this time, Team Bender has some star witnesses of its own.
So he's lying like this, and Ann put the gun like this. That's what they say.
We've come here to participate in the truth-finding.
Selma and Richard Eikelenboom, high-powered and controversial.
They investigated the clothing and there was no blood there.
Ann's lawyers hired the Dutch forensic experts after the Eikelenbooms completed their independent analysis for 48 hours.
But for the Eichenbaums to testify, the Costa Rican judges
La defensa
must agree to make an exception and allow new witnesses.
Selma Yolanda María Eichelbaum.
We don't know if we can testify or not.
The prosecution
Es un testigo nuevo
strenuously objects.
al cual esta representación absolutamente se opone.
The judges decide that Selma can testify.
Here you see the bullet.
Richard cannot.
You would say, okay, with this gun,
But the defense still can use him. He will be allowed to cross-examine the state's medical examiner. Gretchen Flores finally has resurfaced after 2 weeks. Richard Eichenbaum's chance to question this witness is an opportunity, but also a big challenge. Flores is as certain as ever that Ann Bender killed John.
Y la manera de muerte se concluyó fue una manera de muerte homicida.
We're not lawyers, so it's a new role. Here you have a photo.
Costa Rican law prohibits American-style cross-examination in which lawyers use questions suggesting the answers they want. So Ann's legal team quickly has to train this Dutch scientist to think like a Costa Rican attorney.
We have absolutely a lot of work to do.
To help Ann, he'll have to pointedly ask medical examiner Flores about her experiments without seeming to have an opinion either way.
It seems to me what we can do is explore what experiments the the prosecution have not done.
when did you do this? You didn't do this. You didn't do this.
But
That's fine.
That is providing information, and we're not
No,
allowed
no,
It's providing information. Yes, indirectly.
After working all weekend, the team is ready.
Now we have to play lawyer games.
Do you know if this gun was tested for the distance of a muzzle flame?
No, señor, no, señora, no sé.
No, I don't know.
Am I allowed to show a picture?
Sí, adelante.
Yes, go ahead.
Richard Eichenbaum has to tread carefully,
Posición anatómica.
and the constraints limit what he can accomplish. But next, it's Selma's turn. She is a witness.
I remember her walking in and the reaction of the judges, just seeing her because she has such an amazing presence in the courtroom.
And as a witness, she can go much further.
I see no support for the scenario of a homicide.
Her testimony was amazing.
In my opinion, as an expert, all the evidence that is available points clearly in the direction of a suicide.
De un suicidio.
The prosecutor makes a last-ditch effort to strike Selma's testimony from the record.
Que no ha surgido el contradictorio.
But for now, the judges decide it can stay.
You can't unring the bell. They heard what she said.
It's been 3 long weeks. At last, they are ready to vote on a verdict. After 3 trials and nearly 10 years,
The judges are looking at me, and I hear the words,
not guilty.
absuelta,
And that translates
absolved.
absolved.
Yeah.
Bien, eso sería todo. Tengan todos buenos días.
The world believes me, finally.
This time, Ann takes no chances. As soon as Costa Rican authorities return her passport, she flies home to the U.S. with no intention of ever going back to Costa Rica, regardless of what zealous prosecutors do. We caught up with her in Washington. I don't see you flying down to Costa Rica for a 4th trial.
I don't see it either. Not a chance. No.
Not so fast. In a jaw-dropping decision months later, a Costa Rican court announces, yes, it intends to try Ann Bender a 4th time. Her stunned lawyers immediately appeal. But win or lose, it's doubtful prosecutors actually could try her again. Trials in absentia are not allowed in Costa Rica. While there is an extradition treaty in place, legal experts say that after 3 trials, they would be shocked to see the U.S. extradite Ann Bender for a 4th. In fact, Ann seems finally to have put this one-time paradise behind her. Her past there as haunted as the abandoned, overgrown jungle compound she left behind.
I'll never get back everything that was taken from me, obviously. I'll never get back my husband. Now it's time to go after what can be recovered and find a life again.